The sky above New Haven City turned dark even though it was only noon. People stopped walking and looked up in fear. A giant silver starship slowly came down through the clouds without making a sound. It was larger than any building in the city, and its bright blue lights covered the streets below. News drones rushed into the air, cameras pointed at the strange ship, and thousands of people gathered to watch. No one knew why Earth's most famous space commander had suddenly returned after 20 long years. The main door of the starship opened with a soft hiss. A tall man stepped out wearing a clean black military uniform with silver marks shining on his shoulders. His face looked calm, but his eyes carried the weight of many battles across the stars. Behind him stood soldiers from different alien worlds, all showing him great respect. In his right hand, he held a small black box. Nobody knew what was inside it, but everyone felt it was something important. Reporters quickly surrounded the landing area. They shouted questions one after another, hoping to hear the story of the legendary commander. "Commander Ethan, did you finally defeat the Shadow Empire?" One reporter asked loudly. Another shouted, "Why have you returned to Earth after all these years?" Ethan did not answer. He simply looked across the crowd as if searching for someone. His eyes were filled with hope, but also with fear. It seemed that winning great wars had been easier than facing the person he came to meet today. Far away from the noisy crowd, an older woman stood quietly near a small flower shop. Her hair was touched with gray, and time had left gentle lines on her face. She had not come to see the famous commander. She only wanted to finish her work before going home. But when she heard the name Ethan on the television outside the shop, her hands suddenly froze. A memory she had tried to forget for 20 years came rushing back like a powerful wave. Many years ago, Ethan had been only a little boy with bright eyes and endless dreams. He was always smiling, always asking questions, and always talking about flying among the stars. Most people laughed at his dreams because his family was poor. They believed boys like Ethan could never become heroes. Yet one afternoon, standing under an old oak tree, the young boy looked at the woman with complete honesty and said, "When I grow up, I will come back and marry you." The words sounded innocent, and everyone nearby burst into laughter. The woman had smiled kindly that day because she believed it was only the sweet imagination of a child. She gently touched his hair and thanked him for making her laugh. The people around them joked about the promise for weeks. Some even called Ethan the little groom. No one believed such words could survive childhood. As the years passed, the promise became nothing more than a funny story told by neighbors whenever they wanted to laugh. Everything changed the day Earth called for young people to join the first deep space defense fleet. Ethan was among the volunteers. Without looking back, he boarded a training ship that disappeared into the stars. At first, a few letters came home, then the letters stopped. Soon, terrible news spread across Earth that the fleet had been destroyed during its first contact with an unknown enemy. Most families cried for those they had lost. Ethan's name was placed on the list of the missing, and almost everyone believed he would never return. But the universe had written a different story. Over the years, stories about a fearless human commander began spreading across the galaxy. Alien worlds spoke of a warrior who protected weak civilizations, ended impossible wars, and earned the respect of races that had once hated humans. Few people on Earth knew that the legendary commander was the same little boy everyone had laughed at years before. And only one promise remained alive in his heart through every battle, every lonely night, and every dangerous mission among the stars. Now he had finally returned. The crowd watched as Ethan slowly opened the small black box in his hand. Inside rested a beautiful silver ring that sparkled under the afternoon sun. A deep silence covered the entire city. Then Ethan quietly spoke words that were heard by every person standing there. "I came back because a promise should never be broken." At that exact moment, the older woman looked up from the flower shop, and their eyes met across the crowded street. Neither of them moved, neither of them spoke, but both understood that the promise everyone had laughed at was about to change their lives forever. The woman standing across the street was named Sarah. She looked at Ethan with tears slowly filling her eyes. 20 years had changed both of them, but she recognized him the moment she saw his smile. The little boy who once followed her through the village carrying flowers had become the greatest human commander in history. Around them, the crowd watched in complete silence, waiting to see what would happen next. Sarah remembered the first day they met. Ethan had been only 8 years old while Sarah was 22 and worked in her late father's small flower shop. Every afternoon after school, Ethan visited the shop to help carry water, clean the floor, and arrange fresh flowers. Sarah never asked him to work, but the kind little boy always wanted to help. She treated him like a younger brother, and Ethan believed she was the kindest person he had ever known. Life was not easy for Ethan. His father had died in a mining accident on the moon, and his mother worked day and night to pay their bills. Many children laughed at Ethan because his clothes were old and his family had very little money. Some teachers believed he would never achieve anything great. But Ethan never complained. He always looked up at the stars every night, believing that one day he would find a better future beyond Earth. One warm afternoon, Sarah gave Ethan a small birthday cake because she knew his family could not afford one. The simple gift filled the young boy's heart with happiness. While sitting under the old oak tree outside the flower shop, Ethan looked at Sarah with complete honesty. Then, without thinking about how strange it sounded, he smiled and said, "When I grow up, I will become someone important. Then I will come back and marry you." For a few seconds, Sarah did not know what to say. Then she laughed softly and gently touched Ethan's hair. Several people nearby heard his words and burst into loud laughter. They joked that the little boy had fallen in love too early. Some neighbors teased him every time they saw him, calling him the future husband. Ethan's face turned red with embarrassment, but he never took back his words. Deep inside his young heart, he truly believed every word he had spoken. As the years passed, the jokes became even louder. Ethan grew older, but people continued reminding him about the promise whenever they met him. His classmates laughed. Even some adults smiled whenever they saw Sarah and Ethan talking together. Sarah always told him to forget the promise because life would take them in different directions. She believed he deserved someone closer to his own age. Ethan only smiled and quietly answered, "A promise is still a promise." Everything changed when the United Earth government announced a dangerous mission to build humanity's first deep space defense fleet. The best young students from across Earth were invited to compete for a place. Almost everyone believed Ethan had no chance because he came from a poor family with no powerful connections. But Ethan spent every night studying, training, and pushing himself beyond his limits. He remembered every person who had laughed at him, but he never wanted revenge. He only wanted to prove that hard work could change a person's future. On the morning Ethan left Earth, Sarah met him at the spaceport. She handed him a small blue ribbon and asked him to keep it for good luck. She smiled, but tears filled her eyes because the mission was extremely dangerous. Before boarding the shuttle, Ethan held the ribbon tightly and looked directly at her. Then he quietly repeated the same words he had spoken as a little boy. "Please wait for me, I will come back and I will keep my promise." Sarah smiled sadly and waved goodbye as the shuttle disappeared into the sky. She believed those were simply the hopeful words of a young man leaving for an impossible mission. She never imagined that 20 years later, the entire world would stand still as Ethan returned, not only as Earth's greatest hero, but as the man who had never forgotten the promise everyone else had laughed at. The shuttle carrying Ethan left Earth's orbit and entered deep space. The young recruits were excited at first, but that feeling did not last long. Only 3 days into the mission, a powerful alien fleet appeared without warning. Their ships were larger than mountains, and their weapons destroyed several human ships in just a few minutes. Fear spread across the fleet. Many believed this would be humanity's first and last battle among the stars. The battle was a disaster. Explosions filled the dark space, and emergency alarms echoed through every ship. Ethan watched friends disappear in bright flashes of light. His own shuttle was badly damaged and lost contact with Earth. The crew believed they were going to die, but instead of giving up, Ethan helped the injured, repaired broken systems, and encouraged everyone to stay calm. Even in the middle of chaos, he refused to lose hope. After drifting through space for several days, Ethan's damaged ship was found by an advanced alien race called the Aryans. Unlike the hostile fleets, these aliens believed humans deserved a chance to survive. They rescued the remaining crew and took them to a hidden world far beyond Earth's star maps. The Aryans had watched humanity for many years, and they were surprised by Ethan's courage. They offered him a choice that would change his life forever. The Aryan leaders explained that a dark empire was slowly conquering the galaxy. Hundreds of civilizations had already fallen, and millions of innocent lives had been lost. They needed someone brave enough to unite different races against the enemy. Many experienced commanders had failed. Yet after watching Ethan risk his own life to save others, they believed the young human had something rare. It was not his strength that impressed them. It was his heart. Ethan accepted the mission without asking for fame or reward. For years, he trained with alien warriors, learned new technologies, and studied the languages of distant worlds. Every challenge made him stronger, but every lonely night reminded him of Earth. Inside his small room, he kept only one personal item, the blue ribbon Sarah had given him before he left. Whenever he felt tired or afraid, he looked at it and remembered the promise waiting for him back home. As time passed, Ethan became known across the galaxy. He won impossible battles, protected weak planets, and earned the respect of races that had once hated humans. Stories about the fearless human commander spread from one star system to another. But while the galaxy celebrated its new hero, Earth believed Ethan had died many years ago. Sarah also believed she would never see him again, even though a small part of her heart never completely gave up hope. One day after a great victory, the Aryan queen called Ethan to her palace. She thanked him for saving countless worlds and offered him anything he desired. Wealth, power, and even a place among the rulers of the galaxy were his for the taking. Ethan remained silent for a moment before giving a quiet answer. He said he wanted only one thing, to return home. The queen smiled gently and asked why such a great hero would leave everything behind. Ethan slowly reached into his pocket and held the old blue ribbon in his hand. Although it had become worn with time, he had protected it through every battle. Looking toward the stars where Earth waited, he whispered the words he had repeated for 20 long years. Back in New Haven City, no one could believe what they were seeing. The world's greatest space commander slowly walked through the crowd, holding the small ring box in his hand. Cameras followed his every step, and millions of people watched the moment live across Earth. Ethan stopped in front of Sarah's flower shop. For a few seconds, neither of them spoke. The silence between them carried 20 years of memories, pain, and hope. Sarah smiled softly, but her eyes were full of tears. "You really came back," she whispered. Ethan nodded with a gentle smile. "I told you I would." Hearing those simple words, many people in the crowd lowered their heads in shame. They remembered laughing at the little boy who had made such an impossible promise. The joke they had repeated for years had become the most unforgettable promise anyone had ever witnessed. Just as Ethan was about to open the ring box, an elderly man pushed his way through the crowd. His face looked nervous, and his hands were shaking. It was Mr. Thomas, the former mayor of the town. Years ago, he had laughed louder than anyone else when Ethan made his promise. Now he looked at Ethan with deep regret. "Before you do this," he said, "there is something you must know." The crowd became completely silent. Sarah's face suddenly turned pale, and she quietly looked down at the ground. Ethan noticed the fear in her eyes for the first time. He closed the ring box without saying a word. Mr. Thomas took a deep breath before speaking again. "Sarah has been hiding the truth from you all these years. She wanted to tell you before you left Earth, but she believed it would destroy your future." Ethan's heart began to race. He had crossed galaxies, survived impossible battles, and defeated powerful enemies. Yet nothing had ever frightened him like this moment. He looked at Sarah, hoping she would deny the old man's words. Instead, tears rolled down her face. She slowly nodded and whispered, "He's telling the truth." With trembling hands, Sarah walked inside the flower shop and returned carrying a small wooden box covered in dust. She placed it carefully on the table between them. The box had never been opened in 20 years. Ethan looked at it with confusion, while the crowd watched without making a sound. Sarah gently lifted the lid. Inside were hundreds of letters, all carefully tied together with the same blue ribbon she had once given Ethan before he left for space. Ethan picked up the first letter with shaking hands. It was written in Sarah's handwriting and dated only 3 weeks after his departure. He opened it slowly, but before he could read the first line, Sarah quietly stopped him. "None of those letters were ever sent," she said with tears in her eyes. "I wrote to you every month for 20 years, even after everyone told me you were dead." Ethan looked at the box, unable to speak. Every letter represented another month she had spent waiting for someone the world believed would never return. The crowd watched in complete silence as the truth finally came into the light. Then Sarah looked into Ethan's eyes and said the words that shocked everyone around them. Sarah wiped the tears from her face and slowly picked up the oldest letter from the wooden box. Her hands were shaking as she held it close to her heart. She looked at Ethan for a long moment before speaking. "The day you left Earth, I wanted to tell you something important," she said quietly. "But I knew your dream was bigger than this town. I was afraid that if I told you the truth, you would give up your future for me." Ethan listened without saying a single word. His heart was beating faster with every second. Around them, the crowd remained completely silent. Even the reporters lowered their cameras because they knew this moment was far more important than any headline. Sarah opened the old letter and smiled sadly. "Every letter in this box begins with the same sentence," she whispered. "I hope you are still alive." She handed Ethan the first letter. As he read it, tears slowly filled his eyes. Sarah had written about every important moment of her life. She wrote when the flower shop almost closed. She wrote when Ethan's mother became sick and later passed away. She wrote about every birthday, every holiday, and every lonely night she spent looking at the stars. Although none of the letters had ever reached him, they carried 20 years of love, hope, and quiet faith. Then Sarah finally revealed the secret she had hidden for so long. "Many people asked me to marry them after you left," she said softly. "Some were kind men, some were rich. They all told me you would never come back. They said I was wasting my life waiting for a dead man." She paused for a moment and looked directly into Ethan's eyes. "But every time someone asked me to marry them, I said no." The crowd gasped quietly. Many people who had once laughed at Ethan were now standing with tears in their eyes. Mr. Thomas lowered his head in shame. He remembered telling Sarah many years ago that she needed to forget the little boy's promise and move on. Now he realized how wrong he had been. The promise everyone had mocked had become the strongest promise anyone in the town had ever seen. Ethan gently closed the letters and held them close to his chest. During 20 years of war, he had received medals from alien kings, respect from powerful commanders, and treasures from distant worlds. But none of those things meant as much as the letters Sarah had written. They proved that while he had been fighting across the galaxy, someone on Earth had quietly believed in him every single day. Without saying another word, Ethan slowly knelt down in front of Sarah. The crowd watched in complete silence as he opened the small black ring box once again. The silver ring reflected the sunlight, shining brighter than ever. Ethan looked up with tears in his eyes and smiled the same honest smile he had worn as a little boy. Before Sarah could answer, a loud warning alarm suddenly echoed across the city. Every screen in New Haven flashed red, and a frightened voice came over the emergency system.